Victory Media.
This is the Book Publicist Podcast, powered by Local PR Toolkit. I'm your host, Jason Jones, and I'm a longtime book publicist and agent. We're going to talk to publicists, media, publishers, and authors and give you a peek behind the curtain into the world of book marketing and publicity. So, my marketing and publicity starved author friends, let's go! Welcome to another episode of the Book Publicist Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Jones, here once again with the greatest pod producer in all the land, David Wilkinson, also known as DW Esquire.
Hello, Jay.
What does Esquire mean, by the way?
I think it means like a nobleman, like a young nobleman. And I'm 48, so
You're neither young nor noble.
It still applies. I'm young at heart.
I probably should have known what it meant before I called
you're the one who gave
you
me that
on
affectionate nickname.
Yeah. So, for anyone who might be jumping into the podcast for the first time today, this is a show where we're going to talk to some really cool, really smart people in the publishing industry, authors, publicists, publishers, media, and other publicists. Did I already say other publicists?
Other publicists.
Well, I think our listeners
territory,
have
that is okay.
A good idea of who we're going to be talking to.
I would hope so.
So, with the idea that our listeners, a lot of whom are authors themselves, are going to get a sneak peek kind of behind the curtain at what we do, how we do what we do. We're the folks that a lot of times they don't feel like they have access to. We're the in-house, publicists at the major publishing houses. We're the publishers in the big ivory towers that they can't ever seem to get a hold of. This podcast was created with the idea that we give them access to some of these people and some of the things that we do, how do we do them, so that they can learn to do some of these things for themselves.
Yeah.
So that's the idea. You have so capably helped me put this podcast together.
You're so blessed to have me on board. This is a second episode with Katie Hall.
Yes.
So let me actually go ahead and tell your listeners that if you haven't heard part one, they should go back right now and listen to part one, which was the last episode.
That's good.
This is the second part, but Katie Hall is awesome, and she's I'm trying to remember, what was her big thing? She was a fiction.
Katie was the fiction publicist at HarperCollins Christian for many years and was as good as anybody out there. She is well-renowned. Still, she's been out of the publishing business for a few years now, but people still, when they think of fiction publicists, they think of Katie.
So if I have a fiction work as a fledgling author, she my person that I go to? Is that who I should talk to? I have a killer idea, though.
She'd listen.
Maybe she'd be the person.
Yeah, do
you
tell.
Never know.
What is it?
Well, it's kind of like a subterranean YA trash novel kind of thing. It's good. It's good. I'll give you the elevator pitch later. It's so good.
Look forward to that.
It's going to change your life. Katie's going to love it.
I don't know. We'll see. All right, so second part of a great conversation with Katie Hall. Enjoy. Katie, thanks for coming back.
Yeah, glad to be here.
We had such a great conversation last time and we just couldn't fit everything in to one 20-minute conversation.
There's so much, yeah.
Wanted to make sure we had you back, and a lot of things that we still want to get into for our listeners. So let's jump right in.
Let's do it.
I'm so excited about talking to you, and I have so many questions that I think I've jumped a little bit ahead. But backing up to the specific genres, I feel like we're going to have a lot of our listeners are going to be sci-fi writers or,
Sure.
Or romance. So how do you construct a press release or a pitch that you want to send out? And of course, one of the things that we're doing with Local PR Toolkit is helping authors create press kits,
Sure.
helping media understand why the book is relevant, what it's about, who the author is, all those types of things. But in that initial pitch that you're sending out to a media outlet, how do you present a novel? I mean, all romance novels are the same, right? Guy meets girl,
Sure.
guy cheats, girl, slashes his tires, the whole thing. Isn't that, how do you...
Every one of them, right? Exactly.
Right. I can't. How do you do that?
Yeah. Well, it's about finding those threads in the story that are going to relate to what that journalist or what that outlet is going to cover, right? So that might be a particular local connection. Maybe there's a setting that that ties to your book. So beyond that, maybe you're not pitching just your own local news. If your book is set in a different town, absolutely pick up the phone and find out who's covering local stories in those particular towns as well. What kind of local interest story can you create?
So is it wise then as a fiction author to maybe write some of those opportunities into your book? And you're thinking ahead, say, hey, I'd love to maybe pitch media here, and if I include this particular landmark or restaurant, or and maybe you write some of those things in to make it easier on the backside.
Sure. I feel like any time that you can add those details, you're going to create a story that's more believable, that's more relatable. But also, I have to say that this isn't just about what you can do to pitch your book, right? That this is about pitching you as an expert. And so what other things can you speak about as an expert in your field, whether that's something that you researched for your novel or just something that you've done for your day job for years. That becomes the story, that becomes the lead. The fact that you've written a novel, maybe loosely based in that experience, or maybe not, becomes the byline. But even then, that was still a relevant story that we were pitching. We weren't always looking for something that's centered on the book for our publicity pitch.
So in pursuing reviewers, let's talk about reviews are obviously huge. Is it absolutely necessary to send a physical copy of a book to a reviewer, or do a lot of those folks accept a digital copy nowadays? And if they do, what's the best way to go about doing that? Is it NetGalley, or is there some other application or website that they can use to host their book? Talk about that.
There are tons of online platforms now that host digital copies. We were just getting started with them back 10 years ago when I first jumped into the fiction world. But that's certainly a place where books are discovered now too. If they're present on that platform, they're easier for reviewers to get to, and they're listed well. All of the details are included well about the story and about the genre that are going to connect it to other readers in that space. It's going to be easier for reviewers who are actively looking for books to review to find. But yes, you're absolutely right. Sending a physical copy is not the only way.
And expensive.
Absolutely. Things have changed, yeah.
As far as reviews go, another question. Timing, as a self-published author, it used to be when you and I were working at HarperCollins, a release date was everything. Everything had to happen around a release date. And there was a day when books were going to hit shelves, and now of course there are fewer shelves, and so more people are self-publishing, and maybe the release date is not as important. If you are self-publishing a book, and my quote-unquote release date is April 14th, I'm going to try to have everything uploaded and on the digital sites for reviewers. I'm assuming around that date. But is there a kind of statute of limitations, if you will? After a certain amount of time, reviewers stop looking. They're not going to review your book if it's 60 or 90 days old, right? Or what does that time period kind of look like?
It really depends on who that reviewer is. So if they're working for a publication that still has standards around release dates and wanting to release reviews that are relevant to what's going to be on bookstore shelves, certainly having books up, we used to say 3 to 6 months in advance for those full copies to circulate to reviewers, for them to have time to work through their to be read piles, was certainly necessary. But that's the other beautiful thing about fiction, that as soon as a reader discovers your book, it's new to them, even if it's not new to the world. And so there is kind of an evergreen quality to a novel that maybe a nonfiction book about a particular topic might not have.
You should really never then give up pursuing reviews for a book, or I guess what I'm getting at is maybe, yes, it's new to the reader, but as far as reviewers go, is it fruitless for me to pursue a review with someone and say, hey, I released a book a year ago, or a year and a half ago, or 6 months ago, and at some point do they dismiss your book as, well, hit me up when you release your next one. That one's a little bit too far in the past now, or at what point should you kind of lay that down and move on to your next?
Yes, so certainly a few months out from release date, if it's a hard release date, if it's appearing on shelves, and if you're working with a reviewer who's reviewing for a publication beyond just something that they have on their own platform, yes, those standards are still going to apply from kind of traditional media rules. But I love to see readers who discovered a book and then went back to read others from that author over a decade or more. And so the same thing is true for those book reviewers who are reviewing on their own platforms and also placing those reviews on all important retail sites. As soon as they discover a book, again, it's new to them if it's the first time that they've seen it.
Well, how do you know? I mean, as an author, how do you know when your book's been reviewed? I mean, I could push something out there and maybe somebody's reviewed it in a magazine somewhere or online. How do I know?
So I think still setting up news alerts on your name, right, or on your book title is a relevant way. But participating in those spaces like Goodreads where reviewers are gathered, you're going to get alerts every time that your book has been reviewed, that a comment or someone has put it on their It Should Be Read shelf, right?
You can tell by my line of questioning here that I haven't worked in fiction.
Yes. So there's a little bit there, yes.
Yeah, so when you said news alerts, for those that don't know what you're talking about here, Google News Alerts, or there's probably other services where you can go and set up an alert so that every time your name or your specific book title is entered somewhere online, you get pinged.
That's right. And then the kind of courtesy there is to thank that reviewer for their time. There's some differing opinions, I think, on how much you actually engage with what's been written about your book in a review. My take was always, it's not the place for you to try to convince a reader that they should have liked your book more than they did if you're getting something negative. In fact, when we were doing that branding exercise where we were looking for really good ideas about why readers loved books, we usually eliminated the 5-star and the 1-star reviews. We were looking for that kind of middle ground where there was maybe some constructive feedback. I loved this, but I didn't love this as much. And then you as a writer taking the time to figure out, is that something that I'm willing to bend to in my next novel? Or is this something that I need to continue to highlight because it's something that my readership loves?
How do you handle an awful review? If you send a book out, someone reviews it, and they just trash it, they think it's terrible. I mean, how do you handle that?
You call someone else first, right? As a publicist, as a marketing director, I've worked a lot with the agent or with sometimes the husband or the wife or someone else in that office to say, hey, I think this is going to be hard to receive. I just want to give you the heads up first. I want to send this to you first. It's hard, right? This is your baby that you've put out into the world, and whether that's a topical story that you've written for a nonfiction genre, or whether that's a story that you've written from your own heart, it's hard to receive that negative feedback. We say again, look for threads of truth. Look for something that you can actually use to build on as you go forward in your writing career. But also, it's still just one person's opinion, whether that person is writing an Amazon review and hasn't reviewed another book ever, or whether they're a reviewer writing for a publication. It's still ultimately just one person's opinion. So try not to get hung up on that, whether that's praise or whether that's criticism.
So do you respond?
I say no, at least not in a public forum. There might be exceptions if there's feedback that gets personal, for instance, for an author in maybe a Goodreads space where a reviewer is calling out, I think you must be dealing with this in your own personal life. I had a couple of authors who handled that really well. They said, what is it about this individual's struggles that they're facing, that they're writing this about my book? And then leaving something that's short and sweet. Don't get into a Facebook post wall, with this kind of feedback. But just saying, thanks for taking the time to read my book. I'm sorry it didn't meet your expectations, but I wish you well, and I hope that you find something else that you really love to read next.
Do you cross that person off the list? Do you send them your next book?
Maybe not, maybe so. If there's a relationship to be built there, I think we've all seen plenty of times where a media outlet changed their tune. If something doesn't necessarily strike you on one book, it doesn't mean that everything that you're going to write is going to be off of their list forever.
So on the flip side, if someone loves your book, obviously you're moving that person to the top of your list, right, for your next one. And that I'm assuming, as a novelist, you're going to write a number of books. You start to build. You take the 5 or 6 or 10 people that loved your first book, and absolutely those folks are getting a copy of my next one.
That's right.
And so you start to build a list of folks that review you favorably, and you send them
your next book. But beyond that, as soon as you get notice of that review, whether it's in a public forum or not, sending them thanks for just taking the time to engage with your story. They had a choice of thousands and thousands of new releases, right? So the fact that they took the time to read yours and offer real feedback on it is a gift. And so taking the time to just say, I appreciate you engaging with the work that I put out there.
In the form of a handwritten note, probably,
sure, absolutely.
Right? I mean,
That's
always well received.
If you got an address, absolutely.
Yeah,
I feel
I'm
that's
assuming you have an address because you probably sent them a copy.
Yes.
But and then publicly, right?
Yes.
I mean, don't you want to engage in some favorable dialogue there for the world to see, right? You want to engage them publicly and maybe create conversation that some of their other readers will see. I mean, that's important too, right?
Perhaps. I would say certainly make sure that you're following their page from then on out. Make sure that you're lifting up their work to other reviewers. It's again about being a good citizen of that space and making sure that just like you would hope that they would do for your work, that you're promoting the work that they're doing in that reviewing space.
Okay. There's a lot of more non-traditional methods that you and I have talked about, ways that folks can go about getting their books in front of people, whether it's conferences or libraries, and you touched on some of those things a little bit earlier, but are there some more specific things, book clubs, for instance,
Sure.
And in libraries and conferences, and where do we find listings for those conferences? How do you approach your local library? How am I a good citizen within a book club, and what do those opportunities look like?
Right. So being a good citizen as a writer is being a good citizen as a reader, just like anything else. That hopefully the first time that you step foot in your local library or your local bookstore is not when you have something to pitch, when you have your next novel that's coming out, but spending time getting to know who's the buyer at that library, who's the one who makes the decisions about what sort of new fiction is being brought in. Who's the one who's making decisions about programming for that library? I loved, one of my favorite things is to take authors around to local bookstores just to say thank you. Not necessarily to ask them for an event, to ask them to sign any copies that were in the store. You can certainly offer that if it's there. But just say thank you for being a part of the book community that's continuing to do that work in the trenches every day. Bring a dozen donuts, bring a potted plant to sit on the counter, bring a little something that helps them remember that you're just wanting to stop by and get to know them. Ask good questions. Ask about what writing groups might come in here and meet on a regular basis. Is there an opportunity for me as a published novelist to come in and connect with those groups? Maybe there's a children's group that comes in and they do a monthly read along, or they do some sort of educational program. Is there an opportunity for you to connect and give back there? Remembering that selling your book isn't necessarily the lead in any of these conversations that you're having with the kind of outward facing public forums in your community. It's about people knowing who you are as a creative, as someone who loves and appreciates the town where you live. That's true anywhere, right? That's true of any genre as well.
Yeah, all right, so that's really important, I think, for people to hear. You said something there about selling your book can't be
That's right.
the motivation.
Yes.
So that's a big turnoff, right?
Yeah.
For anybody that whether it's a library or anywhere else, anybody that you would approach, I think that's a huge takeaway for the listener, is it can't all be about selling your book.
Yes. That's so hard to remember, right? Because that's at the heart of why we, and a lot of times novelists are not necessarily the most social outgoing people, right? I certainly am not, as even the fiction publicist. But taking the time to just be a human, to go out and connect with someone who's doing a job that you admire, someone who's hand selling books in a bookstore, or someone who's making sure that libraries stay stocked on the latest fiction. Building those relationships is really what's going to make you It's what's going to endear you to a readership, to a community.
A couple of more things before we wrap up, because this is probably a big topic. But if you're a fiction author, you're looking for a conference. Where do I find the right ones to attend? And once I make plans to be there, what are the important things that I do, that I take with me? How do I interact when all those types of things. But I guess let's at least just cover so that our listeners can make their plans for the next several months, until we release our second season. Where do we find the conferences? Which are the best?
So I think that there are certainly going to be some smaller ones, some regional ones, no matter where you are. Places where a library might gather for a fantasy ReaderCon, for instance. But there are also a handful. ReaderCon is here in Nashville in March. This is directly related to the RT Book Lovers Convention that is sadly not happening anymore on an annual basis. But the places where readers are already gathered, look for, just through a Google search, look for your particular genre, see if there is something that's happening, and whether if it fits your budget, taking the time to go and actually attend as a reader, to find out what sort of opportunities there are for authors in that space. It might be some sort of small sponsorship, including a bookmark in a swag bag, for instance. Maybe there's even a book signing. There's a lot of these larger kind of ballroom setting book signings at a lot of those conferences where you could have direct interaction with readers in your book. That's a place where you can lead as an author as well as a reader. But Goodreads often will advertise, people will start to talk about these several months in advance. Readers who are attending these, those who are leading them, the sponsors, the publishers who are leading these conferences, will start to advertise those in advance on their own social platforms. So finding one of those to go and participate, I think is great. It's great publicity. It's also just great education for you to kind of find out who else is publishing in your platform. It's great networking for you to find other authors who are writing in your genre, because again, reading begets reading. So if there's a novelist who's a little ways down the road in terms of they're building their audience than you, finding out what it is that they're doing and becoming one of their friends is certainly worth your energy.
So before we go, we always like to leave our listeners with a 1-minute takeaway. If you could summarize everything, or if there's one really, really important thing that you want them to walk away from this conversation with, if they don't hear you say anything else, what would you like for them to hear you say?
I think above all else, remembering that as a novelist, you are not discounted from traditional media opportunities. Again, that you have a particular story to tell because of the research that you've done, because of the work that you've done to really understand a particular story space. So don't discount those opportunities to tell a media outlet about what you can speak about as an expert. But beyond that, just being a good citizen of the fiction community, right? Of supporting reviewers, of supporting other authors and the work that they're doing. I've always found it to be a completely familial environment, that authors really love on each other in this space. Most of them are not one-hit wonders. They're writing several novels over the course of their lifetime, sometimes hundreds, right? And so it's a long game. Participating well in those circles and learning how to find others who are doing the things that you're doing, that's certainly worth the most of your time.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
I think we could talk for another 3 or 4 episodes. I have so many questions now that you've opened my mind up a little bit to the fiction side of things, and we definitely need to make a real effort to have you and some of our other fiction publicist friends on, because there's just still so much more to cover, and we'll try to roll some of those things out, tips, techniques, things like that, on our local PR Toolkit social feeds and whatnot. But thanks a million for coming in here. I love you. I think you're just such a lovely person, and I always just love spending time with you, and you're so smart. And I'd love to pick your brain some more, and we'll do that, because I think I think your wisdom and your experience is a big plus for our listeners. So
thank you.
Thanks. Good
Thank
to see
you
you
for what you're doing. Yeah, absolutely. This is
good to see you.
This is huge. Good to see you, friend.
So That was the second part of our conversation with longtime fiction publicist Katie Hall. And she touched again, like she did in the first half, on the importance of relationships and touch points within the book community. You've got to get out of your house and visit libraries and booksellers and book clubs. Take some donuts or coffee. Make it personal. Attend conferences, conventions, go make some friends. I know it's hard to do for some writers from places other than behind their keyboard, but it is something that you have to do, as you heard Katie say. So, sound bites, wisdom like that from Katie is invaluable. It's the kind of thing that we as publicists know and hear all of the time, but it's not the kind of thing that you, our authors, friends, and listeners are privy to. And that's why we built Local PR Toolkit. It's a one-of-a-kind suite of tools and resources that train you up to be the publicist you always wanted. Find us online at localprtoolkit.com for more information. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And until next time, remember, the search is over. The publicist is you.
The Book Publicist podcast is part of the Mana 3 Media Network. It is hosted by publicist Jason Jones and is produced and edited by me, David Wilkinson. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. We'd love for you to subscribe to the Book Publicist podcast wherever podcasts are downloaded, and be sure to check out our episode show notes. Special thanks to Katie Hall for once again being on the podcast. Be sure to go to localprtoolkit.com to get started right now on becoming your own publicist. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and you can check out more podcasts by Mana 3 Media, including my own, Dad Matters, on Instagram at Mana 3 Media. That's MANA, the number 3 Media. New episodes of the Book Publicist podcast drop bi-weekly every other Wednesday, so join us again in 2 weeks.